Scum like you has no business in a house of justice. Those words would change everything for one police officer, David Thompson. See, the morning sun was just starting to hit the marble steps of the federal courthouse, casting these long, dramatic shadows. And there I was, walking up, just another Tuesday. I had my favorite leather briefcase, the one with the slight scuff on the corner from years of use, and inside was a day's work. Signed judicial orders, case files I'd personally reviewed, all the boring but crucial stuff that makes the world turn. I was maybe 10 feet from the entrance when this guy stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. Officer Thompson, a real beast of a man, 6'2", 240 pounds of pure attitude. His badge glinted in the sunlight as he looked me up and down. That kind of look that just says, "I see what I want to see." He sneered, blocking my path with his massive frame. Well, what do we have here? Another hood rat trying to waltz into government property? This ain't no welfare office, sweetheart. You lost or just looking for trouble? I'd dealt with a lot of difficult people in my 23 years on the bench, but this was different. This was pure, unfiltered hatred, wearing a badge and calling itself law enforcement. I took a deep breath, adjusted my grip on my briefcase. "Excuse me, officer," I said as politely as I could. "I'm here on official business. If you'd like to see my identification..." His laugh was sharp and mocking. "Official business? Lady, the only business you've got here is the kind that lands you in handcuffs." He was a man who'd never been challenged, never been held accountable. The kind of guy who thought his uniform made him king. Then, two other officers, Johnson and Davis, emerged, drawn in by the commotion like sharks smelling blood. "She thinks she belongs here, Thompson," Johnson called out, already pulling out his phone to record what they probably thought was just another routine humiliation. "These people never learn, do they?" Thompson's eyes gleamed with a hatred that had been festering for years, just waiting for the perfect victim. "Official business," he repeated mockingly. "Let me guess, a lawyer? A judge? Maybe a senator?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. "That's what they all claim when they get caught where they don't belong." I felt that familiar heavy weight of systemic racism bearing down on me, but I just held my ground. "Officer, I simply need to enter the courthouse. If you would just examine my credentials..." He snarled, stepping closer. "The only credentials you need are an arrest record, and you're about to get one." What happened next? Well, multiple security cameras recorded it. He just brought his open palm right across my face with such force that my head snapped sideways. My briefcase flew from my hand, sending judicial orders and legal documents scattering across the stone steps like confetti. The sound of the slap echoed off the courthouse walls, a sharp crack that I knew would haunt his nightmares. Then he grabbed me by the throat with his massive hand, slamming me back against the wall. The bronze nameplate 20 feet above our heads read, "The Honorable Judge J. Miller, presiding." But Thompson was too blinded by his own bigotry to notice the cosmic irony of his actions. "Scum like you has no business in a house of justice," he growled, spit flying from his lips. Metal handcuffs bit into my wrists as he twisted my arms behind my back with unnecessary force. The other officers just circled like vultures, their phones still recording what they thought was routine police work. They had no idea they were documenting the arrest of a federal judge, creating the evidence that would soon destroy all their careers. As Thompson dragged me up the courthouse steps, I was just taking mental notes. Every face, every smirk, every person who would soon learn the true meaning of accountability. Inside, he was riding high on the rush of a successful arrest. Everyone was watching, security guards nodding approvingly, court clerks stepping aside respectfully. "Another one for processing, Sergeant Williams," he announced to the desk sergeant, his chest puffed with pride. Attempted breach of courthouse security, resisting arrest, assault on a police officer. The lies just flowed from his mouth, each one building on the last, perfectly fitting his prejudices and the system's expectations. Meanwhile, I was sitting on a cold metal bench in the holding area. My professional clothes were all wrinkled, and the handcuffs were cutting off the circulation to my fingers. But my mind was just buzzing. I was running through all the legal implications, cataloging every violation of procedure and constitutional right. I thought about the Supreme Court cases that applied to my situation. Terry v. Ohio, Miranda v. Arizona, Brady v. Maryland. You see, as a federal judge with 2 decades of experience, I had presided over thousands of cases involving police misconduct. But I'd never been on this side of the system. Never felt the dehumanizing weight of being processed like a common criminal. The irony was almost overwhelming. He had just assaulted a federal judge 20 feet from her own courtroom and destroyed legal documents she had personally authored, and the phone he'd confiscated. It had direct numbers to the FBI Civil Rights Division, the Attorney General's office, and every major legal authority in the state. He was about to commit perjury in front of the one person who had both the power and the knowledge to destroy his entire career with a single revelation. Thompson's got another live one, Officer Davis announced to the gathering crowd of officers. Claimed to be some kind of judge or lawyer, had a whole briefcase full of fake documents to support her story. Johnson just laughed. These people watch too much TV. They think if they act professional and use big words, we'll just let them walk into any building they want. Doesn't work that way in the real world. The casual racism was breathtaking in its openness. They were so confident that the system would always protect them. Thompson himself even said, "Open and shut. The judge will see right through her act." He had no idea that the system he was so confident in was embodied by the woman sitting in handcuffs just 20 feet away. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and he had no idea the trap was already being set. In the courtroom's administrative wing, Thompson was busy crafting his masterpiece of a narrative for Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh. He'd perfected this art form over 12 years, a delicate balance of truth and fiction that transformed a messy reality into a clean legal proceeding. He had learned that the system was designed to believe police officers, especially when they were testifying against defendants who looked like me. Subject was dressed inappropriately for legitimate court business, he began, his voice taking on a professional tone. She was carrying an expensive briefcase that appeared inconsistent with her socioeconomic status, suggesting possible theft or fraud. When I approached, she became increasingly agitated and verbally abusive. Each lie was carefully calculated to plant seeds of doubt, reinforcing stereotypes that would make Walsh and the judge more likely to accept his version of events. He claimed I'd swung at his face and resisted arrest, forcing him to use minimum necessary force to subdue me. Meanwhile, in the holding cell, I was just smiling to myself. Every lie he told under oath was becoming crucial evidence in the federal prosecution that was about to destroy his life. The temporary courtroom was packed when the session was called to order by Judge Robert Parker, filling in for the mysteriously absent Judge Williams. Parker was a thin, pale man who prided himself on running an efficient courtroom. He had no idea the emergency he'd been told about was currently sitting in handcuffs at the defendant's table. Thompson approached the witness stand with the supreme confidence of a man who had testified hundreds of times without ever being seriously challenged. He just settled into his testimony with the practiced ease of a professional performer. Your Honor, at approximately 8:45 this morning, I observed the defendant engaging in suspicious behavior consistent with attempted unauthorized access to government property. I sat there, perfectly still, my handcuffed hands folded in my lap, listening to him transform my polite request for entry into aggressive demands. He claimed I was a repeat offender who tried to talk my way out of accountability, a classic deflection tactic. He even presented a partial cell phone video he'd conveniently started mid-confrontation, claiming his body camera had malfunctioned. My fellow officers, Johnson and Davis, came up and corroborated everything, adding more layers to the web of lies. They swore they'd seen me swing at Thompson's face and try to kick him, transforming their criminal assault into a heroic act of law enforcement. But I knew something they didn't. Every word of their false testimony was being recorded by the court's stenographer, creating a permanent legal record that would soon become crucial evidence in their federal prosecution for conspiracy, perjury, and civil rights violations. Thompson just smiled, completely unaware that his confident testimony was actually digging his own grave deeper with every lie. I hope this court will send a clear message, he concluded, that attacks on law enforcement and the judicial system will not be tolerated. The state rested its case, and Judge Parker looked over at me with the weary expression of someone preparing to hear desperate lies from a convicted criminal. The defendant may now present her statement, though I should note that the evidence against you appears quite substantial. I rose slowly from my chair, the handcuffs clinking softly as I moved. Despite the purple bruise on my cheek and the disheveled state of my clothes, I carried myself with an unmistakable dignity that made several people in the courtroom shift uncomfortably. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said quietly, my voice carrying a weight that made Judge Parker look up from his notes with sudden attention. "I want to clarify several factual inaccuracies in Officer Thompson's testimony." My eyes swept the courtroom methodically. Landing on each person who had supported his lies, I began citing Supreme Court rulings, calmly dismantling his false narrative piece by piece. When he claimed I was trespassing, I cited Hague v. Committee for Industrial Organization, which establishes that public sidewalks are a constitutional public forum. When he claimed my documents were forged, I gestured to the evidence table and explained that they were authentic: case files, judicial memoranda, and correspondence, all of which I had legitimate access to in my professional capacity. Judge Parker's expression shifted from dismissive to deeply concerned. "And what exactly is your profession, Miss Williams?" he asked. A slight smile played at the corners of my mouth. "I have some experience with the judicial system, Your Honor." Then I got to the body camera malfunction. I explained that the courthouse has extensive security camera coverage and that the county maintains automatic backup systems for all body camera footage, uploading it to a secure cloud every 60 seconds. I formally requested a preservation order for all electronic surveillance data from that morning. Prosecutor Walsh stood up, objecting, but I just cited Brady v. Maryland and Giglio v. United States, calmly explaining their obligation to preserve and disclose all exculpatory evidence and any evidence that might impeach the credibility of their witnesses. Thompson's face was beginning to lose all color, his confident smirk replaced by pure, genuine fear. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my judicial parking pass, my building access card, and my federal judicial ID. "Your Honor, I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding about who exactly Officer Thompson assaulted this morning." I held up a leather credential wallet, and even from across the room, everyone could see the gold federal judicial seal. Judge Parker stared at the wallet, then at my face, then at the bailiff, who was nodding grimly in confirmation of his worst fears. Thompson's face had gone completely white, his hands shaking, his entire life flashing before his eyes. "Court will recess for 15 minutes, Judge Parker said hoarsely. The gavel fell with a sound like thunder, and Thompson's world began to crumble around him. During the recess, I stayed in the holding room. The bailiff, Henderson, came in, his hands shaking as he struggled to understand how the respected judge he'd worked with for years ended up in a cell. "Judge Williams." "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "It's all right, Henderson," I said calmly. "But I need you to do something very important for me. Go to my chambers, quietly, and bring me my judicial robes, the black ones with the gold trim that I wear for formal proceedings. And bring my ceremonial gavel, too, the engraved one from my federal appointment ceremony." He nodded vigorously and hurried out, leaving me alone with my thoughts as I prepared for the most important judicial proceeding of my career. When Henderson returned, I slipped on my flowing black robes. The fabric settled on my shoulders like a mantle of constitutional authority. I opened the wooden box and lifted out my ceremonial gavel, its familiar weight an extension of my will. Engraved on its polished handle were the words I had chosen 23 years ago during my appointment ceremony. "Justice is blind, but she sees all." As I adjusted my robes, I looked at myself in the small mirror on the wall. The bruise on my cheek was still visible, but now it served a different purpose. It wasn't just evidence of his brutality. It was a symbol of how far the system had fallen and how completely it was about to be restored. "Henderson," I said, "when we return to that courtroom, I want you to announce me with full judicial protocol." He straightened his own uniform, his voice filled with newfound purpose. "How would you like the announcement, Your Honor?" I smiled. The Honorable Judge Jessica Miller presiding. The courthouse buzzed with nervous energy as the gallery filled up. Thompson sat slumped in his chair, his uniform wrinkled, his face ashen. Prosecutor Walsh was frantically making phone calls. Everyone knew something unprecedented was about to happen. Then, Henderson's voice boomed through the courtroom. "All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Jessica Miller presiding." The words hit Thompson like a thunderbolt of divine justice. His face went from red to white to green in a matter of seconds. Judge Parker, who had been sitting in what he now realized was not his chair, turned pale as death and fled the courtroom. I entered through the judge's chamber door, wearing my full robes, my ceremonial gavel held firmly in my hand. I took my place behind the bench, my bench, and sat down slowly, deliberately, with the kind of controlled dignity that made everyone understand they were witnessing something unprecedented in the history of American jurisprudence. "Officer Thompson," I said quietly, my voice carrying the full weight of federal authority that had been building for 23 years. "You may remain standing." He looked like he was about to vomit or faint. "Approximately 2 hours ago, you testified under oath in this courtroom. Do you recall your testimony?" He just stood there, paralyzed. "Let me refresh your memory," I continued with devastating calm. I pulled out a tablet and turned the screen toward the courtroom. "This is footage from courthouse security camera number 7. And this is backup footage from your own body camera, automatically uploaded to our county's secure cloud storage system every 60 seconds, a system you apparently forgot existed. Officer Thompson." The courtroom watched in absolute horror as the morning's events unfolded with crystal clarity. My professional dignity, his naked hatred, the sound of his open palm cracking across my face, his venomous words echoing through the speakers. "Scum like you has no business in a house of justice." It was all there, undeniable. I advanced the footage to show his private commentary, filled with casual racism and brutal intentions. "Look at this uppity bitch thinking she can just walk into my courthouse. These people need to learn their place. Time to teach another lesson." "Officer Thompson," I said, setting down the tablet, "you asked me if I had any employment verification to prove my right to be in this courthouse. Well, I do. I've been the presiding federal judge of this courthouse for 23 years. Every case you've ever testified in, every warrant you've ever requested, has been under my direct constitutional authority." He finally found his voice, a barely audible whisper. "Your Honor, I didn't know." My eyes flashed with controlled fury. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to look, Officer Thompson. You saw a black woman, and you made assumptions based on your own prejudice and hatred." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to barely a whisper. "But there's something else you didn't know. For the past 8 months, I have been conducting a comprehensive federal investigation into patterns of misconduct and racial bias in this police department. You have been under federal surveillance, and you just provided us with the most perfect, unambiguous, undeniable evidence of criminal civil rights violations that any prosecutor could hope for." I lifted my ceremonial gavel, the engraved words glinting under the courtroom lights. "Officer Thompson, you said that actions have consequences. You are absolutely right about that." I stood, my judicial robes flowing around me as I delivered the most important verdict of my career. "Based on the evidence presented in this courtroom, evidence that came from your own mouth, your own actions, your own camera, I find you guilty of felony assault. I find you guilty of assault on a federal judicial officer. I find you guilty of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and I find you guilty of perjury in the first degree." The charges hit him like physical blows. He collapsed into the prosecutor's chair, his body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I never meant for this to happen." I looked down at him, my voice firm and uncompromising. "Your apology is 23 years and countless victims too late. Your remorse is only appearing now because you finally got caught by someone with the power to hold you accountable. Every person you brutalized over the years deserved the same justice I'm delivering today." I lifted my gavel high. "Today, I'm not just delivering justice for myself. I'm delivering justice for every person whose complaints were dismissed as unsubstantiated. I'm delivering justice for every family who had to watch their loved ones get brutalized while the system looked the other way." My voice reached its crescendo. Officer Thompson, you told me this morning to know my place. Well, let me tell you exactly what my place is. My place is ensuring that bullies like you can never again hide behind a badge while destroying innocent lives. The gavel came down with a sound like the crack of thunder, final and absolute. Officer Thompson, you are hereby sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by federal law. You will serve 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in applause that lasted for 5 full minutes. Justice had finally been served, swift and complete. And 6 months later, the ripple effects were still changing everything. The courthouse was renamed the Justice Miller Federal Courthouse. Here, justice finally found its voice, but it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many stories like this go untold? How many people are brutalized by the system without a hidden camera or a federal judge to expose the truth? Do you think justice is truly blind? Or does it just see what it wants to see? Let me know what you think in the comments below.